Can you beat Horizon Zero Dawn's Frozen Wilds DLC with only consumables? If you've not seen the first part of this run where I tackled beating the main game, I recommend watching it first before this video. Things that I already explained in the base game I won't re-explain here, such as how we farm, quick drop traps, or increase trap damage. This is because there are much bigger issues than DLC, and new scenarios that need more than just the base game strats, so we've already got a lot of ground to cover. As a quick recap, I'm running this on a new save, not New Game Plus. I'm running ultra hard, and I'm defining consumables as any item in the hotbar, though calling an overridden machine to help in combat is off limits. So, let's get started. At the start of the DLC area, we run into a Scorcher blocking the way. Well, okay, it could probably be skipped, but I couldn't back down from the first machine, could I? Its main strat is leaping to get close and then using burst AoE attacks, which means the Shield Weaver went on immediately. It does have a long-range ground fire, but it didn't seem to do it very often. Luckily, it takes a break between certain moves, and even if it didn't, the fast drop trap strat let me place traps down in between certain attacks. Despite a few close calls with death, it went down after only 12 traps and wasn't too interesting of a fight. With the path open, I made it up to the Banuk and started the Shaman's path. This quest begins with a new type of enemy quite unlike the others, and a lot of pessimism from a particular NPC. These things are called control towers, and they pulse once every 10 seconds, healing any nearby machines. This one is a required kill, and of course has machines guarding it. These ones are demonic, meaning they have more health and strength than even the corrupted enemies in the base game. At first I tried a head-on approach, but couldn't outdamage the tower's healing easily, so instead I decided to try backing away and leading enemies outside of its healing zone. Unfortunately, they run back once they get out of healing range, so that idea didn't really pan out. This meant I was gonna need to take them down fast enough so that they couldn't heal, so I put a large amount of traps in their pathway and led them through, which surprisingly worked. You might ask why I didn't take the control tower down first, so that the enemies couldn't heal, but that's where I've got bad news. See, I detonated a bunch of traps on it, and it seemed impervious to damage. So I dropped the difficulty to see its health bar and confirmed it was definitely immune to traps since they can't hit its weak spot. So, run over, right? Well, we do have one projectile option: rocks. They deal 1 damage at a time, and on ultra hard, this thing has 250 health, so you know what that means. Yeah, this took long enough that I even managed to find 2 glitches with rocks, which I never thought I would say. If you pick up a rock while standing on something Aloy has to balance on, she skips the pickup animation and can pick up the rocks instantly. The second one has to do with the throwing animation. If you pull out the bow after throwing the rock, you can interrupt the animation where she lowers her hand, which allows 5 rocks to be tossed while the weak spot is exposed instead of only 3. In fact, pulling the bow out was really interesting, because just like with blast traps, it seems the bow coils technically increase rock damage. So instead of dealing 1 every time, they sometimes deal 2, which makes me believe that their actual damage is around 1.5 with my bow out. The fact that I found all of this out while taking a single tower down should tell you all you need to know about how tedious these are. The rest of the Shaman's Path quest is mostly just a parkour section, and while there are some enemies on the way to Aurea, none of them are a required fight, so I just skipped them. After meeting Aurea, we start for the Werak, which gives 4 objectives where we only need to complete 2. I immediately rolled out the hunting ground because timers have historically not been great for this run, and you guys wouldn't appreciate it if I wimped out and did Sekuli's route with 0 enemies, so this only leaves 2 options left. For the first, I decided to start with the Tallneck, and I immediately regretted picking the Tallneck as soon as I saw Glinthawks. These machines need to be taken down before we can progress, and they're all demonic, so once again stronger than the base game versions. For the ground enemies, the quick drop strat with the Shield Weaver made quick work of them, and narrowed the fight down to just the Glinthawks. As always, fighting Glinthawks sucks, but these guys seem to dive much more frequently than the ones in the base game fights. Also, unlike the last time I fought them, I had the Shield Weaver now, so I didn't have to worry as much about the random explosions or the damage from placing traps right on top of them. So despite being an annoyingly long fight, I didn't really struggle too much. With the machines down, the quest now has a search for 3 parts to repair the Tallneck. The first part is the array, which is surrounded by scrappers. They're pretty easy to stealth around, and even if they find you, this type of combat I was quite used to by now. The stabilizer is guarded by a Scorcher just like the one I beat in the intro. The biggest difference with this one was that I knew it would charge after me, so I could pre-trap its path. Otherwise, my usual bait and dodge strat was still just as effective. And of course, I didn't realize that the Scorcher was completely optional since the scrapper behind it was the one actually carrying the part. The last missing piece is up on the cliffs, being held by, you guessed it, Glinthawks. I didn't really emphasize the ones near the Tallneck since I dealt with them easy enough, but I cannot state just how bad the ones on this cliff are. They really had me flashing back to the Durval quest due to how long and horrible of a fight this was. The area you fight Glinthawks in makes a major difference with combat, and this kind of terrain makes getting them hit by a trap significantly more difficult than a place like where the Tallneck was. For some reason, they didn't swoop down as much here and preferred to just shoot ice, and even when they did swoop down, they don't get as close to the ground. I tried leading them elsewhere, but on the cliffs is the only spot they'd follow me. After watching their attack patterns for almost an hour, I noticed that they all have a pretty predictable timing as to when they'll swoop. Since I could loosely predict when they'd dive down, I'd avoid placing traps until right before they'd drop. It didn't always work, but some of their dives would wind up being lower than others, and they'd eventually hit the traps. I even got a few lucky calls where a second Glinthawk was flying nearby and got hit by another one blowing a trap up. After a couple hours and a lot of wasted traps and a lot of pain, they finally all went down, banking me the actuator. With that, I got back to the Tallneck and powered it up, completing the first of my 2 required subquests. The other half of this has me clearing out a bandit camp. Heading towards the camp, I knew it was pretty large, but I had a pretty clever idea here. I'd aggro the nearby machines and drag them towards the entrance to cause the bandits to infight with them. This worked wonderfully and gave me a chance to rig up the initial gate with a huge mass of traps. With the initial force cleared, I was able to weave in and out of the opening gate to create a trap barricade that I could continuously drag bandits through. It's important to use fire traps here since they don't trigger each other, and the enemies would have blown up all my detonating traps on a single bandit. That said, there are a ton of enemies, so I found myself retreating to lose aggro and coming back repeatedly to slowly pick off the bandits one by one. While I was able to dive in and pull a chunk back through the starting gate, since this camp is so massive, I needed to deal with most of them in their own areas. Luckily, I could still employ similar strategies in all of the other areas, so none of them really gave me any issues, until the boss fight at the end. This one locks us in with a flamethrower boss and his elite friends, and that flamethrower hurts quite badly. Taking the guards out first is essential, but fighting them head on is a bit of an issue due to the range of the main boss. Luckily, there's some blaze barrels laying around, and I just needed to stay hidden while trapping them so they didn't blow up before an enemy was near. The enemies didn't want to approach them, but by denying them line of sight, I was able to force them to position near the barrels and take them out. Once down to the final boss, you'd think I could just run up and drop traps with the Shield Weaver protection, but his flamethrower can actually explode those traps, so it makes this a high-risk strategy. So instead of Shield Weaver, I actually opted for the stealth armor here, and tried to stealthily chip his health down. The premise is simple. Watch his path, and set a trap in his pathway, then run away. Once he's near, you can toss a rock from afar to bait him into the traps. Interestingly, even if this boss was only alerted and not fully aggroed, he'd sometimes fire random shots in my direction, so I made sure to stay behind cover when not placing traps. That said, he wasn't particularly difficult once I had this strategy, so I finished up the camp and the requirements for progressing the quest. The next section was challenging Aratak, which takes place as a race to take down machines and launch balloons under a time limit. Oh god, not another time limit. When I made it to the first herd, I had just below 6 minutes, and with that amount of time I had to play high risk, which meant aggroing every machine and running them through traps with the fast drop strat. I did not spare any traps here and went extremely aggressive thanks to the Shield Weaver protection. Surprisingly, the biggest issue for the timer was the Watchers, since they like to shoot from a distance instead of fighting close. For them, I mostly ran up and dropped traps directly on them instead of baiting them into traps. Surprisingly, I made pretty good time on this section, having 2 minutes to spare when I got to the balloon. Part 2 was more of the same, but with different machines like Bellowbacks and Ravagers. We only have to take the Bellowbacks this time, but this was a tough machine composition to fight, and after a few deaths I knew I'd have to deal with at least the Ravager. Detonating blast traps were a bit problematic due to the charging Ravager and Bellowback AoE, but regular blast traps turned out to be a good counter for this. Blast traps I could spam and not worry about random explosions, and even better, they could randomly blow up the tanks on the bellowbacks. With the bonus damage from being frozen, the only difficult part of this fight was watching out for the Ravager and not getting taken down by a stray charge. In the end, I wound up taking the Ravager and the bellowbacks down, while leaving the other enemies alive since I only needed the bellowback kills. Section 3 is a parkour bit that's not impacted by this run, but once to the bottom we get put in a fight with 3 Frostclaws. Frostclaws are a very threatening machine type with a big health bar, and these are the first ones we're forced to fight. Since Aratak was part of this fight, I probably could have hidden a cave and set my controller down, but I felt that wasn't the right spirit to have since, well, this is a challenge after all. Due to their long-range attacks, I opted for blast traps instead of detonating ones. As for defense, I couldn't solely rely on the Shield Weaver since these things can hit multiple times quickly for high damage. So while they were all alive, my strategy was to use the caves as cover while trying to draw one Frostclaw away from the group. If another Frostclaw joined in on the 1v1, I'd go back through the caves to try and isolate it once again. Unlike a lot of fights, I couldn't just mass drop traps due to the threat of the attack from the one I was focusing on, and the potential for another one to join in. It was important to play defensively since, even with the fast drop strat, these guys were pretty quick, and getting hit was way scarier than making the battle last longer. The hardest part of this fight is surviving the first 3 since these guys are all close and long-ranged fighters. After the first one's taken out, the pressure eases up a lot, and after a while, I eventually took them all out, claiming the title of Chieftain. The next quest is Firebreak, which has us traveling out to Long Notch. Once inside, the goal is to reach the cauldron door, and luckily there's no requirement to kill machines, so I just ran past everything in the first couple of rooms. In the next room, there's an option of going directly through a set of machines or through a side route that seems safer. That said, Aratak was questioning my ability to clear out the main room, so I said, challenge accepted, and went the main way. This room is pretty large and made sneaking around to pre-trap it quite easy. I went for regular blast traps since I figured detonating wouldn't deal their full damage. These machines are no joke either, with 2 demonic scorchers and a demonic behemoth blocking the path. They managed to take me down quite a few times. Fighting them all together is basically a recipe for death, since the Scorchers tend to be close ranged while the Behemoth fires from a distance. So the strat starts with a massive amount of traps and grabbing a Scorcher's attention. These are just enough to take one Scorcher down, and then the allies will briefly keep the Behemoth up top. As long as I kept my distance, the second Scorcher would always charge at me, letting me trap its path. After a short bit, the Behemoth will start attacking me as well, but with just one Scorcher and the Behemoth left, I was able to hold on long enough to kill the Scorcher. Afterwards, as long as I stayed behind cover, the Behemoth would eventually drop down, and I could fight it in a better arena than the main space. While it didn't charge as much, I found it pretty easy to stack traps then back away to force it to step into them, giving it easy strat to 1v1 it. On the way to the next area of Frostclaw spawns, which turned out to be a complete pushover. Unlike the ones I fought in the challenge with Aratak, this one was alone, and the NPCs did a great job of drawing its aggro. The first set of traps I laid blew up its freeze component, making it take a huge amount of damage, and then go down to only a couple more traps. After squashing Aratak's doubt, the next room has a set of basic machines and a demonic scorcher. Basically, I dropped a bunch of traps and they died. But of course, getting into the cauldron wouldn't be this easy, because we still have to deal with a demonic Thunderjaw in the next room. I hadn't fought one of these guys since the Heart of the Nora quest, but this one is demonic, meaning it's much stronger, and I didn't have the backing NPCs to draw its aggro like in the Heart of the Nora. In fact, this particular Thunderjaw seemed to never focus on the NPCs and always kept aggroed on me. While staying alive is generally an issue, playing it carefully isn't a great strat since this thing has a massive health pool. The longer I have to fight it, the more likely I am to slip up and need to restart, so I generally spam traps every moment I could, and when it shoots down lasers, there's a great opportunity for dropping them. While I had plenty of traps for this fight, I was starting to get worried about having the materials to build traps for the remainder of this quest, since you're locked into this facility and can't back out to farm. Additionally, the Shield Weaver wasn't strong enough to block the combined damage of its attacks and my own trap splash damage, and I didn't bring many potions in either, so I had limited healing. My best bet was going to be to take it down as quick as possible. The main idea I had was to force the Thunderjaw up and down the central ramp. Since it can't hop up and down the ledge, I could trap the ramp and then force it to walk through the trapped ramp. The time it took to reposition for a charge gave me room to set up traps and prepare to dodge. It also helped funnel it in a particular direction to ensure that my traps actually hit it. After a significant number of retries, I finally managed to take it down using a total of 64 traps. That may not sound like a huge number of traps until you realize that it's 128 wire, 64 metal vessels, and 120 blaze, which equals hours of farming to get. That said, with the Thunderjaw down, it's finally time to get into the cauldron. Inside the cauldron, we hit the first thing that's not an enemy that appears to be a problem, which is some cable overgrowth that's intended to be cleared with a bow. Luckily, a rock works just fine. The next room has a node override protected by a shell walker, who the NPCs seem to really want to kill, so who was I to stop them? Come on, guys. Any moment, guys. Guys? Well, I'm glad I never depended on them before. The cauldron heats up at this point, quite literally, with a room full of machines guarding a disconnected node that leads over lava. This fight was a pain, probably due to the arena layout, but the Scorchers were the biggest issue. They're just fast, they can clear a lot of distance, and even though I found spots to hide, they'd mysteriously find me and kill me. Since hiding didn't work, I fought them head on and took advantage of the main ramp. I loaded it full of traps before aggroing them, then got as much upfront damage in as I could. After that, I'd dive down and run around before going back up to keep dragging them through a series of traps on the main ramp. Since their attacks didn't hit the lower or upper floor, I managed to keep weaving between them until they went down. The other machines in the room weren't blocking me from opening the bridge, and I was still worried about my trap supplies, so I just skipped fighting the rest. The remaining sections of the cauldron is mostly just a puzzle to break nodes with rocks, but there was one interesting section. In short, I had some machines that kept aggroing from platforms I couldn't reach yet, and therefore couldn't take them down. Luckily, the stealth armor I had was enough to prevent their detection, so I could get to each of the platforms and knock out the nearby machines before they killed me. With this section of the cauldron down, I'd finally made it to the final fight of the Frozen Wilds, and man is it bad news. There's a control tower here you have to beat before you can even start the fight. Just like in the intro, traps won't hit it, so I had to chuck over 150 rocks to kill it before I could even try the boss. While we examine how painful this is, let me add a detail about these towers I didn't mention earlier. When you have the shield weaver on, these things strip the overshield it gives, which definitely won't be an issue, right? After an eternity of tossing rocks, the boss finally spawns, which turns out to be a demonic fire claw. Being my first attempt without knowing its moveset, I went down in less than 30 seconds, and guess what? Yup, this thing respawns every time you lose, just to make this fight even more disheartening. Of course, we couldn't have just the boss either, as the side rooms spawned enemies, and they turned out to be pretty annoying since the boss already took my full focus. After a couple of attempts, I decided to try and take them out before they could join the fight by trapping their spawn area, and it worked out pretty well. As long as I spaced the traps properly, I could knock out all the little guys before they got into the fight. Dodging his attacks turned out to be pretty difficult too, and I had to redo this fight so many times that I had to learn how to perfectly evade every attack. Staying away from him is important, as any attacks made when he's over top of you will probably hit, while the attacks from a distance are a lot easier to dodge. Most of his attacks can either be ran from or dodged through. The only two attacks that deviate from those are his claw sweep and eruption attack. With the claw sweep, if you dodge through his first strike, he'll turn around and continue, but if you dodge through his second or third slash, then you'll be safe. The eruption attack has two forms, with the first just hitting you from below. For this one, it's simple enough to just run away and dodge at the last moment, but the second version starts shooting rocks into the sky that home onto you. The only surefire way to dodge the falling rocks I found is to have enough distance so that they can't hit you. If it spawns in the middle, getting this much distance is extremely difficult, so the key to this version is to maintain spacing from the boss before he uses it, so that it spawns near the outer side of the arena when he does finally use it. Even if you know how to dodge every one of his attacks, juggling the positioning and predicting which attack is coming next because they come very quickly is significantly harder than I can express, and I had this fight internalized to where I could almost dodge it blindfolded. The next issue is dealing damage. In almost every fight we've done in this whole run, spamming traps has been the way to go, but this fight is a bit too chaotic for that to work. His attacks can blow up even the blast traps, and do so at a distance. So even if I did have the time to stack them, they'd just be wasted resources and hazards that could potentially kill me. For this reason, it's important to only have one placed at a time, and to only place it down between his attacks immediately after dodging. Interestingly, we've never talked about breaking components either until this fight, but I found out that it's possible to target certain components on the Fireclaw with blast traps. When he charges, he drops to all 4 and will charge straight at Aloy. By placing a trap first and then moving left or right to steer one of his legs into the trap, it'll hit that shoulder component and often make him fall to the ground. Even more interesting is that the more you target the same leg, the more frequently he will wind up falling to the ground. So, with a strat and good dodging, that's gotta be the fight, right? Well, after the Fireclaw loses half of its health, it spawns a control tower of all things, and even more machines. While the machines sucked, they were more of an annoyance than anything else. The control tower though, yeah, we've already established that traps can't hit these guys, and this one is no different. And to make it worse, it was healing up the boss. I did the math, and even if I could find a way to take the small machines down and get the NPCs to focus the boss, I still couldn't outdamage the healing they gave. The bad news doesn't stop there either. The Shield Weaver is now useless. The boss goes to guard the control tower, and the NPCs couldn't take the small machines down on their own due to the healing, so I literally needed to do everything here. Here's a replay of my inner dialogue at the time. There's no way I'm doing this, there's no way I'm doing this, there's no way I'm doing this, there's no way I'm doing this. So, I resolved myself to taking this thing down. Of course, I naturally had to try and find literally anything that could do damage other than rocks. I knew that enemies sometimes could hit each other, so surely that would be the case here, I thought. But after checking with a lower difficulty, it turns out that no, the Fireclaw can't damage the tower. Interestingly though, exploding some components in the Fireclaw will deal damage, but the tower heals those components, so I couldn't explode them during this phase with traps. Something else happened during this experiment though. It's really hard to see, but one of the NPC shots hit the tower. It flashed like it dealt damage, but even if I assumed they could take it out, it was so insanely rare that I could have just taken it down with rocks before they hit it twice. I hit yet another issue, which was that I didn't stock enough tracks, so I also had to back out and farm more here. I farmed for hours to fill my entire inventory with ingredients for traps, and also grabbed a large chunk of new boxes that only held traps or rocks, and then redid the entire cauldron sequence. So, back from the top. Before starting the fight, drop anything that's not necessary from the quick menu to make the quick menuing easier. With knowledge that 2 waves of enemies will spawn, I managed to figure out a placement for traps that could take both waves down by making 2 split rows of traps like so. With the first wave down, I could slowly whittle the Fireclaw down to the point where the tower spawned, then the second wave would go down to the remaining traps just as I planned. After this, it becomes a huge grind fest to hit the control tower weak spot with rocks while also dodging the Fireclaw. There's no way to sugarcoat this. This was horrendous and made me actually question my sanity. I did find that by running up the cliff to deal damage and then dropping off after the Fireclaw comes up helps create opportunities to throw rocks since he tries to always get close. The rock interrupt strat I found on the starting control tower turned out to be invaluable here, not for the time savings, but because it let me quickly dodge the Fireclaw if I misjudged the positioning or he used a long range attack. While this strat is necessary to prevent damage, since I can't use the Shield Weaver and there isn't unlimited healing, it's important to only throw rocks when it's safe. This tower takes so ridiculously long to take down that mistakes are a guaranteed, so I had to minimize how many heals I used as possible to make it through. Also worth noting is that regardless of how many hours I spent perfecting my rock throwing, some were going to miss due to aiming being crazy difficult, and because the tower pulls its weak spot in at really bad times. You'd think I should just throw them while I'm near the tower, but let me say that this would easily make this tower take over 3 hours to take down, and I'm not god gamer enough to dodge perfectly for that long. I had to literally quickscope rocks in this phase, which is a phrase I never thought I'd say. Unless you try this yourself, I don't think I could express with words just how absolutely painful this fight is. Oh, also, I'll mention that the tower sways, so you also have to predict the sway because of the slow throw speed of the rocks. Let me just quickfire a few more issues that go into this phase of the boss. If you get hit, you have to run around the stadium to pick up the few heals that are in here, and if you run out of healing, you pretty much hard lose. Definitely not salty. Also, unless you have enough boxes of rocks, you'll have to spend time picking up rocks off the ground while dodging and trying to throw at the tower. And something that slows this fight down even more is just how many times I had to go into the inventory and search boxes for traps, potions, or rocks. So how long did it take to kill this thing with rocks? Well, when I was successful, it took 50 minutes. That's right, almost an entire hour of dodging this boss and tossing rocks at a tower while being under the pressure of not getting hit or making mistakes. And this is after the initial 20 minutes spent fighting the boss to even get the tower to spawn. And now that the first tower is finally down, the boss is back at full health. If you made it this far, I have a critical piece of information. Check your surroundings and don't step in the lava. I truly cannot express the pain and disappointment of dying after the first control tower goes down just because you were stupid and stepped off the stage into lava. Since I wound up retrying a lot, it helps a ton in the early fight if you focus on taking the shoulder components out to disable his fire rock throw attack and his burrow volcanic rock attack. I would say it's critical to take them down after this control tower if they're not already down though, because guess what happens after fighting for another 25 minutes? That's right, this fight has 3 control towers. One to start it, one when he's 50% dead, and another when he's 75% dead. And of course, this one also spawns more machines. At least with the third control tower, the Fireclaw hangs near it trying to heal up for quite a while. This gives us enough chance to take the little machines down without focusing on pre-trapping the doorways again. Unfortunately, the positioning of the second tower sucks significantly more than the first, and the cliff is too easy to get hit on to use it, so dodging is even harder this time. And if the feeling of pain isn't high enough yet, the Fireclaw seems to be more aggressive on the second control tower, and focuses more on using its long-range attacks. While you can usually get those attacks caught by the tower, these attacks do have splash damage, and it's very easy to misjudge the trajectory and get hit. That said, it's not like the boss is giving you any window to throw these rocks, so I was forced to take risks in order to damage the tower, and didn't have any blatant openings like with the first control tower. I will note that it's possible to hit it from really long distances, and I did land multiple hits from pretty far away, but oh boy is it ever difficult. If you've never practiced your rock throwing skills as much as your bow shooting, this is one of the best exercises I can recommend, because let me tell you, this tower has some really odd angles to throw these from. Also, you know how I mentioned the healing pouch was limited? Yeah, there aren't that many pickups in this fight, and I happened to run out of those in this phase, and my potion stash was also running low. If anyone is crazy enough to do this again, I implore you to bring 100 potions in boxes. You will thank me. That said, I happened to run out of potions on this control tower. Luckily it was just before it went down though, which gave me just enough time to re-equip the Shield Weaver. With the second tower down, I had to once again take this thing's health down from 100% since it fully healed up during the control tower. And thank goodness I backed out to farm more traps because man, this fight took a massive number of them. I legitimately brought in 1,500 traps between my massive blaze stock and pages of boxes. The last portion of this fight is technically easier because the Fireclaw has a bunch of his attacks disabled, and he falls over easily if you hit his shoulder with traps. But let me say, after over 2 hours of constant fighting, it is so easy to make a mistake, and every time I did, I just saw myself having to restart the entire sequence. I played the last bit of this fight extremely safe and focused on the remainder of his components. I'd been targeting his components in such a way that his left shoulder was the last thing to break. If this is the case, he'll permanently catch on fire and take continual damage. In this phase, it was limping and burning and kept falling over from my traps while the NPCs shot at it, and I did feel slightly bad for the Fireclaw here, but it was also revenge for every time that it pushed me into lava or ended my 2-hour attempts. But after 2 hours and 45 minutes of battle, the Fireclaw finally fell. I'm not sure how fast my heart was beating, but retrying an uncountable number of times on such a lengthy fight, the relief of it finally being over felt great. So yes, you can beat Horizon Frozen Wilds on critical with a new save and only consumables. Would I recommend anyone ever doing this again? Absolutely not. If you couldn't tell, the ending Fireclaw fight was pretty intense, and while the strategy is there, it is abysmal, and honestly rivaled my Stadium 2 challenge in terms of pain. I seriously have over 70 hours of attempts on that boss, and every time I lost after taking the first control tower down was extremely disheartening. That said, I was really proud to actually beat this fight and finally finish the Consumable Only run properly. If you enjoyed this one, consider dropping a like, comment, or subscribe to check out more upcoming challenge runs or past ones I've done. I'm Glitch the Box Links, and I'll see you in the next Out of the Box challenge.